Hi, my name's Aaliyah, and today I'm going to be doing a review of Panic by Lauren Oliver. And to my left, I have my laptop where I have my notes. I have like an 8-page outline for this, and I also have my tablet where I was taking notes while I was reading on the Kindle app, so I'll be referencing this as well. But to start, I wanted to give a little background on how I even found this book. And the reason I read the book is because I watched the Amazon Prime TV adaptation first. And I was interested in the adaptation because I watched Challengers with Zendaya and Mike Weiss, and I was like, I want to watch more things with Mike Weiss in it. And one of the things he's in is Panic on Amazon Prime. So then when I was watching it on Amazon Prime, they have this fun facts section for whatever you're watching. And in the fun facts, it said that the show was based on a book. So then I decided to pick up the book, but I was a little bit hesitant going into the book just because of the author, and I haven't read any of their other works personally, but I have heard some not very great things, mainly about their most popular series, I believe, which is Delirium, which is a trilogy, and I just haven't heard good things about it. The only conversation I ever hear it brought up in is when people are talking about Hunger Games knockoffs or books that came out post Hunger Games, and it's not usually in the list of good books that came out following the Hunger Games. And then my next little preface is that it took me literally forever to read this book because I was super busy with school. I started it in January and then I didn't finish it until May. So since I was reading it over a long time, some of my memories might be a little bit fuzzy, but I did take notes throughout in my Kindle app, and then I also wrote an outline, so hopefully I'll be able to hit as many points as possible. So the premise of the book is that essentially they live in this small town called Carp, and every summer graduating seniors play a game called Panic. And Panic is essentially a series of dangerous challenges and tests of courage, and whoever wins at the end wins a large sum of money. And then the book follows two main characters, Heather and Dodge. And the book alternates between their perspectives. It's not a even 50-50 split. I would say there are definitely more chapters in Heather's perspective than Dodge's perspective, but they are definitely the two main characters. So before I get into any of the spoilers, I want to address a few things that I can talk about without spoiling the plot, which the first thing is the writing. And I honestly did not really like the writing. And I'm not a writer and I'm not an English major or anything, but there were certain times where I'd be reading a sentence and it would just totally throw me off, and I'd have to reread it again, where it felt like there should be a natural pause, but then there wasn't, and sentences started to kind of feel like run-on sentences, and the descriptions sometimes felt a little overdone and just drawn out. So my first example of this is, I'm going to read the quote. So the book says, "Despite the fact that the breakup made her want to go into permanent hiding, despite the fact that she was doing her best to avoid everyone who knew her even vaguely, the news had reached her." And to me, it just feels really repetitive. I feel like it could have been reworded into two separate sentences, or leave it as one sentence, but don't use despite twice. I'm not sure if you could tell, but when I was reading that, I almost stumbled over my words. Then a second example, it reads, "The top of the ridge was a shaggy mass of black, where the trees were encroaching on the rock, or the rock was getting pulled slowly into the woods, one or the other." And I'm you could have just picked one description, do either or if you're gonna have both, instead of saying this or that and then saying one or the other, just say this or that. And then my next issue with the writing was that they gave out a lot of character names for people that would be totally irrelevant for the rest of the book. And it wasn't just first names, they were giving first and last names for certain characters in this world and then never mentioning them again, which is fine. But for me, I was seeing all these names, I was trying to remember who's who and keep track of what attributes they assign to these people, just for them to never be mentioned again. And it's if they're never going to be mentioned again, what was the point in giving them full names? But yeah, so an example of this, it says, "Caitlin Frost and Shayna Lambert laughing doubled over while Patrick Colbert, yada, yada, yada." And it's fine to give more perspective of other people in the town, but it's also did you really need to give them full names? That made me think they were going to be important, and they're not important to the story at all. But yeah, so then outside of the actual writing itself, one gripe that I did have with the book is that there was a major lack of diversity. From what I could tell from all of the character descriptions, every single character in the book is white. And in the show, they definitely did some race swapping for certain characters, and I did have issues with some of the racial castings in the show, but at least it was more diverse. So now getting into the next section, I want to talk about the characters. So from here on out, there will be spoilers for the book. I'm going to try to avoid giving too many detailed comparisons to the show because I don't want to spoil the show. I might make another video just about the show. So I'm really going to try to focus on the book, but there will be book spoilers ahead. So the first character I want to talk about is Heather. She is one of the two main characters, and I would say the more primary main character compared to Dodge. And I did not like her. And the main reason that I didn't like her is that I did not like her motivations for probably at least the first half of the book. So initially, she was not going to play Panic. That was not part of her plan, and I'll read an excerpt on why, because I did not like her reasoning. So in the book, she says, without meaning to, she thought of all she could do with the money. She thought of how far she could go, what she could buy, how long she could live, how many miles away from Carp she could get. But no, she couldn't leave Matt. Matt had said he loved her. He was her plan. So off rip, I'm like, if you don't want to play Panic, whatever. But I felt like her reasoning was kind of pathetic. Matt is her high school boyfriend. So I'm like, you're going to give up the chance to win life-changing money because you don't want to leave your high school boyfriend and leave your small town. Me personally, I would not make that decision. So then her reasoning for changing her mind and joining the game is essentially that her boyfriend cheats on her, which, yeah, that sucks, but it led her to making this very impulsive decision to join the game. And in doing so, she betrays her friend Natalie because her friend Natalie is going to play Panic. That's been the plan. She already knew that. So Heather wasn't going to play. She was just going to watch and support her friend, right? But then last minute, she changes her mind and then joins the game and is competing directly against Natalie. And all this, like I said, is over a guy. And then my next point is that she doesn't really have any life goals in the book. In the show, she wants to go to college. She's poor. She wants to go to college to help lift herself out of her current financial situation. But in the book, she doesn't really have any sort of goal at all, which is why when her boyfriend breaks up with her or cheats on her, she makes such a flippant decision to just join this dangerous game. And then the next thing that I didn't like about her is that she was very insecure and gave off a lot of pick-me vibes, which obviously she's a teenage girl. It's a YA novel. Teenage girls generally are kind of insecure. But the amount of times that she made pick-me-ish comments or actively expressed jealousy towards other girls around her, including her friends, it was just very off-putting to me. She had this complex about how she was tall and how other girls were shorter and more the male preference than her. She said something about how it's so unfair for her friends to be happy when she's not. There were also just small things that I was why are we talking about other girls right now? So during the water tower challenge, which I'll get into a description of all the different challenges later on. But during the water tower challenge, she's climbing up the ladder and she has this revelation that all the people below her can see her butt. She's oh, I hope my underwear lines aren't showing. And she says she just couldn't stomach thongs and didn't understand girls who could. And I'm just that comment was so unnecessary. You could have just left it at you don't like thongs. Why are you bringing other girls into it? And then the worst thing to me was the way that Heather and Natalie talked about Delaney. Delaney is the girl that Matt, Heather's boyfriend, cheated on her with. Natalie calls her a whore and says, bet she gives him herpes or worse. And I just felt that was totally uncalled for. Yes, you were cheated on. Obviously that hurts, but why are we talking about the other woman? Your relationship with Matt is honestly none of her business. And yeah, if she knew you guys were together, it is kind of messed up for her to still get with him. But she doesn't owe you loyalty because you're not in a relationship with her. You were in a relationship with Matt. And then I would say that her one redeeming quality was that she did gain what I thought was a more reasonable motivation about halfway through the book. A little bit of background on her character is that she lives with her mom, Krista, and her stepdad, Bo. And Krista and Bo are not good parents. They live in a trailer park, which that doesn't necessarily mean you're not a good parent, just to be clear. But she doesn't have a good home situation, and her mom also is a drug addict. And then she also has a little sister, Lily. So one night, something goes down with the mom, and Heather runs away from home and brings Lily with her. And for a while, they're living in a car, but then they end up moving onto Anne's property, which Anne, she owns this farm, and Heather ends up working there when she's trying to find a job. But essentially, once all of this goes down and she runs away from home, she has a new motivation to win Panic, which is that she needs the money to be able to take care of herself and her sister, which I found a lot more compelling than her just joining on a whim because her boyfriend cheated on her. The next character that I wanted to talk about was Dodge. He's the secondary main character. And he was just all right, in my opinion. Things that I didn't like about him, I didn't like how obsessed he was with Natalie from the beginning. And that's a really odd statement for me because I usually love male characters who are really down bad for their love interest. a key example of this is Art from Challengers, who's played by Mike Feist. Dodge is also played by Mike Feist. But I just really didn't like his characterization. Like in the show, he was a lot more mysterious and like slow to trust others, which I just really liked that characterization a lot more. And then I also didn't like being in his perspective. This was more of an issue towards the beginning, but there were certain like comments in his perspective that just felt really like creepy and gross to me. So one example of this is when he's talking about Natalie. He's talking about like the outfit that she's wearing, and he says he couldn't help but think that whenever she had to use the bathroom, she'd have to get totally undressed, which weird, creepy. I think wherever they were, she was wearing some kind of jumpsuit type of thing. Okay, and then another example of this was when Natalie's like giving him a hug and he comments on how he can feel her boobs against his chest. And I'm just like, I don't want to read that. I actually really don't want to read that. Like, we could have just cut that line. We could have just left it at the hug. I didn't need to know that. That's enough of the dislikes for him. One of the things that I really did enjoy was how they emphasized his relationship with his sister Dayna. Dayna is paralyzed, and there was a small detail that they included where he gives Dayna leg massages every single day, no matter what. And essentially it's to help like keep blood flow going to her legs, and it's supposed to potentially help with her paralysis. And I thought it was really sweet how they showed that moment between them and how he like doesn't give up hope that it could help her paralysis and does it every single day for her. And speaking of Dayna, I want to go into her character a little bit. I have really, really mixed feelings about her character in the book. And that's because the way that she ends up paralyzed is totally different between the book and the show. Not to go into too much detail on the show, but her paralysis in the show is a result of a crime where she's the victim. She's a completely innocent party and she ends up paralyzed. Whereas in the book, she ends up paralyzed after playing Panic. And the very last challenge for Panic every single year is Joust, which is essentially where there are two cars on a single lane road and they are going towards each other at very high speeds. And essentially whoever doesn't swerve off the road wins. And during her year, she was going up against a guy named Luke. So Dodge believes that Luke sabotaged Dayna's car. And if Luke truly sabotaged Dayna's car, that gives more credence to Dodge's plot to get revenge by essentially injuring Luke's younger brother, Ray. But in my opinion, it was not clear at all whether Luke actually sabotaged the car. Like, Dodge keeps saying that. He says he sabotaged the car. He says that he thinks that Luke sabotaged the car, but there's like no flashback scene or anything. There's no detail on exactly how he sabotaged the car. So the entire time I was doubting whether Luke sabotaged the car at all. And if Luke didn't sabotage the car, by simply participating in Joust, there's potential for extreme injury. It's an extremely dangerous challenge. So it's like, theoretically, if Luke didn't sabotage the car, you can't really put the blame on him because Dayna willingly participated in the challenge. Because if you're thinking about it, even if she swerves off the road and doesn't get into a collision, if she swerves and crashes into like the woods or anything, she could end up paralyzed. Or if she doesn't swerve, they could collide and she'd still end up paralyzed. So that made me feel like more mixed feelings on her character. And basically the entire time I was just questioning whether her car was actually sabotaged or not. So next I have Natalie, and Natalie is one of Heather's best friends. And like I mentioned when I was talking about Heather, Natalie was already going to play Panic, and then Heather joins and essentially starts to compete directly against her. And I think that Natalie was so valid in being upset with Heather for this, but I definitely think she took it a little too far. Because what she ends up doing is essentially making a deal with Heather to split the winnings 50-50 if either of them win. But then she also goes behind Heather's back and secretly makes that same exact deal with Dodge. And then later on, Natalie is booted from the game because she didn't do well enough on one of the challenges. And at her birthday party soon after this, she gets drunk and basically accuses Heather of sabotaging her, rather than taking accountability for the fact that she was actually never very good at Panic. Like, she was a massive scaredy cat. She was scared of literally every single challenge. And Heather, as well as Dodge, helped her through a lot of the challenges. And if it weren't for them, she probably wouldn't have made it as far as she did. And then there's kind of a side plot where she's kind of cheating on Dodge, which they're not officially together at the time, but it's still really weird to me because if you're dating someone, you should be honest about the fact of whether you're seeing other people or not. But yeah, so from what I can tell, I think she might have been cheating on him with two different guys. So on page 132, I highlighted, it says, Nat had Dodge hanging on her every word and was also still seeing a bartender over in Kingston, some sleazy guy who rode a Vespa. which Nat insisted was just as cool as a motorcycle. So there's an unnamed guy from Kingston, but he's described as a bartender. Then later on at her birthday party, she invited some other guys there that like Dodge didn't know who they were. And she admits that one of the guys that she's seeing is someone that she met when they went to the mall in the beginning of the story. Essentially, they go to the mall because Natalie wants to participate in this modeling casting call, and she meets like a casting director guy there, and she starts up a honestly pretty weird and inappropriate relationship with him because he's quite a bit older than her, and then also the power dynamic of him being a casting director and he's offering to help her out with her modeling. So arguably she was being taken advantage of, but I still feel like it was weird for her to not be honest about the fact that she was seeing other people, and then also starting her relationship with Dodge essentially just to have him help her in Panic. And then later on, I feel like in the story, they try to hint at her having OCD or some kind of compulsions, but I don't feel like it was very well integrated into the story. And I don't have OCD and I'm not an expert, but in my opinion, it just felt kind of random. And it kind of just felt like they were trying to make us sympathize with her character, even though she'd done kind of a lot of messed up things to both her friend Heather and Dodge. So next I want to talk about Bishop. And I didn't like Bishop very much in the show or in the book. I do feel like his character served more of a purpose in the show, but in the book, the main reason I didn't like him was just that he was a judge for the game. So when it comes to Panic, there are two judges and they like plan and execute the challenges, and they're picked by the previous year's judges in secret. And that wouldn't be that big of a deal, especially considering the fact that his reasoning for accepting the position as judge is because the judges get paid, and he wanted to take the money from being a judge and give it to Heather. And that would redeem him, except for the fact that some of the challenges that he went along with, I felt like were actually insane, which I will get into like the main one that really like bothered me when I go over each of the individual challenges. And then the last character that I wanted to talk about was Ray. And honestly, I don't have much to say about him. And that's because he was a very, very minor character in the book. Whereas in the show, he was a very important character and I'd consider him one of the main characters. But in the book, he really just serves as like a target for Dodge's revenge. So that's all for the characters. Now I want to get into the challenges. So from here, I'll really be reading off my notes. Most of the challenges were very similar or the same as the ones in the show. They did like repurpose a few of them when it came to the show, but I'm going to go over each one. So the first challenge is the leap, which requires the competitors to jump from a cliff into the lake. And this is like the entry challenge. So if you want to play the game, you have to complete this challenge as your entry. And this was basically exactly the same between the book and the show. The next challenge was the water tower challenge, where essentially players had to climb up a water tower and cross a plank that was between two of them. The next one was the highway challenge, where the players had to wear blindfolds and cross the highway, which I thought that one was kind of crazy. Like all of the challenges are dangerous, but that one I felt like was especially dangerous. Next was Trigger Happy Jack's house. And in this challenge, the players had to break into this house owned by Trigger Happy Jack. That's what the town calls him. And he basically is like really protective of his property. So he has booby traps set in the yard. He also has guns. And if you go on his property, he'll try to shoot you. And then there was an extra piece to this challenge, which was that he had like a secret gun hidden in his house. So everyone had to break in, take an item. But if you also found the gun, that was like a bonus. And then the next challenge was the haunted house challenge, or the Graybill house. And for this challenge, it was initially super simple. It was basically just go in the house and whoever is the last to leave wins, right? You don't want to be the first person to leave, otherwise you're out. And it was really simple and honestly boring. So what they decided to do to spice it up, and by they I mean the judges, which includes Bishop, they decide that they're going to set the house on fire. And I just thought that was crazy, because it's like, with the other ones, like, yeah, they're very dangerous, but it's kind of like you're walking into a pre-existing dangerous situation, like specifically with the highway. Like the highway's there and you choose whether to cross it or not. And you're fully aware of what you're doing in the danger. But with the Graybill house, it was like you're sending people in to just spend the night in this haunted house, and then you're literally setting it on fire, which one, they wouldn't be able to anticipate, and two, you're literally committing arson. And I feel like that's kind of just glossed over. And obviously fire is incredibly dangerous. Multiple people ended up hospitalized after the challenge, including Heather. But after that challenge, it goes into the individual challenges. And the main ones we like hear about are Natalie, Heather, and Dodge's challenges. Dodge, his had to do with spiders, but we don't actually see his challenge happen, like in his perspective or anything. We hear about it after the fact, so there's not much to say about that one. Natalie, her challenge was to enter the tiger pen on Anne's property, and she had to stay there for 10 seconds to be able to win the challenge. She didn't make it through. She, I think, only made it to like 8 or 9 seconds, so she was cut after that point. So Heather's challenge was Russian roulette. So she was handed a gun, specifically the gun that she found as the bonus in Trigger Happy Jack's house, and basically had to play Russian roulette. It was loaded with 1 bullet, which that one I also felt was a little bit too far because the gun actually was loaded. And also, like I mentioned before, Bishop is a judge, so he is a part of planning these, and yes, it's his friend's choice to play the game, but he is actively putting his friends' lives in danger by going along with these things. And by the end, the final challenge is Joust, like I mentioned. And once we get to the end, there's actually 3 players still in, which was Heather, Dodge, and Ray. And essentially the way that they were going to work this out was Heather and Dodge were going to go against each other first, and then whoever won was going to go against Ray. And things got really interesting with this challenge because, as I said, Dodge wants to get revenge on Ray. So he tries to make a deal with Heather for her to forfeit the challenge so that Dodge can go up against Ray. But a lot of things get in the way of his plan, which I will get into when I talk about the relationships. So when it comes to the couples for this book, there were 2 main couples, those being Heather and Bishop and Natalie and Dodge. And I honestly did not like either couple. I'm like, if I were in either of these situations, I would have left. I would not have been with this person. I thought both the ships were like terrible. So for Bishop and Heather, they start off as friends, which is fine. I don't mind a friends to lovers situation. But when they were just friends, I did not like the way that Heather acted about Bishop's relationship. Because prior to them getting together at the end, Bishop was dating a girl named Avery. And Heather was incredibly dismissive of their relationship. Like, she literally says when referring to Avery, "I won't call her a girlfriend." And I'm like, I get it. You like him, but you have to respect his relationship because he's not with you. But even after this point, when he breaks up with Avery, the fact that he was a judge the whole time and kept it a secret from her, I don't think that's something I could get over. Especially when, as a judge, he literally committed arson. He sent her into a house and then set it on fire, and she ended up in the hospital. And in the final chapter, Heather literally says, after all this time, she still couldn't believe that he had planned panic or forgive him for not having told her. And I was just like, okay, so you can't forgive him, but you're still together at the end? And also, why are we ignoring the fact that he literally committed arson? And it's not just overlooked by Heather. I feel like it's also overlooked, like, in the town in general and by the cops, because he ends up turning himself in for the fire. So he loses the chance at the judge money because he turned himself in to the police. And after he turns himself in, they let him go home while charges are pending. And then it's basically never mentioned again. Like, he goes off to college and he's like coming back to town to visit on the weekends. And it's just never brought up, like, if he faced any charges. I can assume based on the timeline, he never got any jail time or anything. So next is Natalie and Dodge. And there's a lot of reasons on both sides of the relationship that I don't feel like they should have ended up together. Which, to start with Natalie, she started their relationship on false pretenses. The reason that she got with Dodge in the first place was basically to use him for the game. And in doing so, she was lying to both him and Heather. And then, like I mentioned before, at the start of their relationship, she's kind of cheating on him. And whether you want to consider it cheating or not, she still just wasn't being honest with him about their relationship and whether she was seeing other people or not. And then on Dodge's side, when he finds out about the fact that she was seeing someone else, he basically calls her a whore and accuses her of giving up her body for modeling opportunities. Which I just want to read this section because the way that this plays out is so insane to me, especially considering the fact that she still ends up with him at the end. So the section goes like this. He says, "You kissed me," he said. "You kissed me. You made me think." She shook her head. She still wouldn't look at him. "It was for the game, okay? I wanted you to help me win. That's all." That voice he didn't recognize came out of his mouth again. "I don't believe you." The words sounded thin and flimsy. She kept speaking, almost as if he wasn't there. "But I don't need panic. I don't need you. I don't need Heather. Kevin says I've got potential in front of the camera. He says," Kevin? Something clicked in Dodge's brain, and his stomach opened up. "That scumbag you met at the mall? He's not a scumbag." Now she turned around to face him. She was shaking. Her fist balled and her eyes were bright, and there was wetness on her cheeks, and it broke his heart. He still wanted to kiss her. He hated her. He's legit. He believes in me. He said he would help me. The cold in Dodge's chest had turned into a hard fist. He could feel it beating against his ribs, threatening to explode out through his skin. I'm sure he did, he said, practically spitting. Let me guess, all you had to do was show him your tits. Shut up, she whispered. Maybe let him fill you up for a while, or did you have to spread your legs too? As soon as he said it, he wished the words back into his mouth. Nat stiffened as though a shock had run through her, and he could tell from her face the guilt and the sadness and the sorrow that she had. So with the way that played out, and regardless of whether what he said was true or not, because he says, oh, like, it seems like that was true. I don't know. I'm just like, as a woman, even if that's what you did, the way he spoke to her, I'm like, I would not get back with him after that. And then on top of all of this already, at the end, she literally kidnaps him and locks him in her basement because she finds out about his plot to like hurt Ray, and she freaks out. She's like, we have to stop him. He's either gonna end up hurting himself or like really hurt Ray. So she basically kidnaps him and locks him in her basement to prevent him from going to joust. Yet after literally all of that, they end up together in the end. And I definitely think they should have just gone their separate ways. And then I know I said before that I don't want to go too in depth on the show, but I did want to just point out a few key differences because these really stood out to me after watching the show first and then going to the book. Because the show changed a few things, but also really just added a lot of like completely show original content that I was very surprised wasn't there like at all in the book. So in the show, the cops are way more involved in the story than they are in the book. And then also previous players, like from previous years, are very much involved in the story in the show, and they're not in the book. And then if you read the book, in one of the first few chapters, it's mentioned that 3 to 4 people have died as a result of playing Panic. But very little detail is given on those deaths, and then they're also like not mentioned ever again throughout the book. But in the show, those previous deaths play a huge role in the plot. So in conclusion, I would rate the book a 3 out of 5, and that's because there were a lot of things that like bothered me, such as the writing and then a lot of the like pick me language. Like, it was definitely a product of its time. I think it came out in the early 2010s. And then my rating is also kind of low because I feel like the show did a lot of things better than the book did. So going from the show to the book, it was kind of a letdown. But I wouldn't rank it any lower because it was still enjoyable for me to read. I did enjoy the general premise, and then it was also pretty fun to like point out differences as I was reading between the show and the book. But that's basically all my thoughts on the book. I didn't cover everything about the show, so I might make a separate video about that. Let me know in the comments if you'd like to see that. And if you like me and if you like my content, please make sure that you like the video and subscribe to my channel. I hope to see you next time. Bye!